Hi, Acadiana. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Welcome to Let's Talk Tropics on this Tuesday afternoon. It is another pretty day here in Acadiana, although it has gotten a little bit more humid compared to what we were seeing over the course of the weekend and the early part of next week. Believe it or not, we actually have the National Hurricane Center watching something off the southeastern United States coast. So there's a little something to play with. And of course, we're going to look at all the models. Only really one model is indicating any tropical activity in the Gulf or the Western Caribbean, but a couple of models are now starting to pick up on a non-tropical or maybe a subtropical low that may develop here right off the East Coast. So we'll look at that in just a little bit. First, I want to take a look at our current conditions. And our temperature right now is 87 degrees. We've got a mix of sun and clouds here in the hub city. It does feel like 92, though, with the heat index, our dew point up to 71, humidity climbing. Winds are out of the south-southeast, and our pressure currently at 29.99. And as you can see on our traffic cameras here, another beautiful day, a lot of sunshine out there. We might see one or two isolated showers right along the coast or over southwestern Louisiana, keeping that rain chance there at 10%, but expecting a high temperature today near 90 degrees. And real quick, there's a look at the radar. Again, we've got a couple of little pop-up showers here over parts of Calcasieu and into portions of Cameron Parish that are starting to fire up right now. And again, that's why we left that 10% rain chance in the forecast this time around. But as we look at the region, we've got some bigger thunderstorms back over portions of Texas and Oklahoma. And then you'll also notice some showers, some thunderstorms in the offshore waters there off the southwest coast of Florida. That is the old frontal boundary that brought the pleasant weather that we saw over the course of the weekend, but that's also going to be a focal point for the possibility of some tropical development. In fact, you're seeing a lot of the cloud cover really gathering here. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday there, stretching from Cuba, the western part of the Gulf, and then getting into the Atlantic Ocean. There's an old frontal boundary that's right in here that's kind of washing out. And there might be a bit of a low pressure area now starting to develop along that front. And at this point, it looks like it's going to kind of track off toward the northeast, perhaps up the Carolina coastline. So there is the possibility, at least a slight chance, that we could see some tropical development there over the eastern seaboard. So we'll take a look at that in just a little bit. But you can see the wind speeds are a little bit stronger there over the southwest Florida coast and getting over toward Cuba. And then our local waters, we're seeing our winds generally out of the southeast today at about 5 to 10 knots, and seas will be running about 2 to 3 feet. So a little closer view of what's going on there in the eastern part of the Gulf. Again, we've got that frontal boundary that's out here. Also notice you see this kind of haziness right here. That's some smoke. Not only do we have Saharan dust that's in place along the Gulf Coast this time around, but we've also got smoke that's coming in from Canadian fires. So that's why the sky is a little bit milky out there today. But all the moisture is out here farther toward the east along that front, and some of that moisture is now being pulled out of the Gulf and rather the Caribbean and into the southern part of the Gulf. And you can see that that moisture plume kind of extends there right around the Yucatan Peninsula toward Belize and then northern parts of Honduras. And then things kind of quiet down as you get down toward the Costa Rican and the Panamanian coastline. And then as we look at the Caribbean, really most of the Caribbean is nice and quiet at this point, but again, you've got all this moisture that's right about in here. So that's the area that we're going to concentrate on here over the next couple of days. And then in the next couple of weeks, we might be seeing that Central American gyre perhaps getting a little bit more active. And that might try to throw something around in the Western Caribbean and perhaps into the southern part of the Gulf sometime the following week. And looking at the tropical Atlantic satellite, really not much going on. Very typical conditions that you would see for the early part of June. Bit of a tropical wave that moved off the African coast, but it does seem to be dissipating. So really the only game in town is this area of moisture, this old front, and the possibility of a bit of a low pressure area trying to develop here off the southeastern coast of the U.S. So there's the official 7-day forecast from the National Hurricane Center. This is from earlier this morning. We'll get another update in about a half an hour or so. But again, we've got a very low end chance that Low pressure could develop there off the east coast of Florida and then start to drift northward toward the Carolina coastline. Now, this could be a subtropical, a tropical system, or just a non-tropical low. But if it becomes a subtropical type of system, we might start to get some of those potential tropical cyclone advisories that would come out. And if it does become a subtropical or tropical cyclone, of course, it would get that tropical depression status and then perhaps could get that first name, which would be Andrea, there on the list. Now, the Global Tropics Hazard Outlook that looks at week 2 and week 3, this actually came out last week. This is only updated once a week, but it was a great tool last year. Week 3 was in the experimental stage, so now it's operational this time around. But every 7 days, this is released, and you can see there in the last issuance that we've got a little bit of a possibility of some action here, maybe in the western part of the Caribbean or the southern part of the Gulf there. Again, that is the area that we'll be watching, but that's also a part of the region of the Atlantic Basin that's the most likely to see tropical development during the month of June. And there is a quick look at what we normally expect during the month of June. Usually the Gulf, the western part of the Caribbean, and over toward the Bahamas. Those are your hot spots. Again, sorry about the telestrator here. No matter what I do, it always seems to want to draw an extra line on here, and it's been doing that since last year. And no matter how I do it, if I delete it and put it in there again, it likes to put that extra line. But that is the general area where you're going to see tropical development during the month of June. So models are trying to play with something. And, because it is June, as we're transitioning into hurricane season, the models are also transitioning as well. And they're saying, oh, well, it's hurricane season. I need to start looking for tropical systems. And the GFS has been trying to play with stuff here and there. But the other 3 global models that we look at initially, because those are your long range models, the other 3 really aren't showing a whole lot of action here over the next week or 2. Now, as far as our normal tropical cyclone activity, again, June and July are relatively quiet, and then things tend to ramp up pretty quickly there. About halfway through August, we peak out on September 10th. Things tend to stay relatively busy, even here along the Gulf Coast through the mid to latter part of October. And then once we get into November, things really start to drop off. So that's kind of why we expect the bulk of the hurricanes and the tropical systems to come during the months of August and September, but usually get 1 or 2 during June and perhaps about 1 up to 2 during the month of July. And then August and September normally would bring about 4 each month, and October about 3, and then November 1 or 2. And that comes out to be about 14 named systems over the course of a hurricane season. Water temperatures are quite warm once again here over parts of the Western Caribbean. In fact, some of our water temperatures are now starting to exceed 30 degrees Celsius, which is 86 degrees on the Fahrenheit scale. Now, anything over 26 can support a tropical system or a tropical system that's trying to develop. So the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, and the western part of the Atlantic is pretty much open for business when it comes to our water temperatures. And as far as where those water temperatures are now compared to normal, the Gulf waters are a little bit warm for this time of the year, and so are the western Atlantic and the western Caribbean, but a little cooler than average as you get into the central and eastern part of the Caribbean and portions of the Atlantic Ocean. So again, areas that we want to watch are pretty much in our neighborhood across portions of the Caribbean Sea and then into the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico. Tropical cyclone heat potential is another one of those terms that we throw out. So not only do we want to look for the surface temperatures to be above 80 degrees, but we also look at how deep that 80-degree isotherm goes down below the surface of the Atlantic or the Caribbean or the Gulf. And those areas that are shaded in red is where we have the most tropical cyclone heat potential. So we look at this normally when we're talking about the worries of rapid intensification. Let's say you've got the perfect atmospheric conditions and then a tropical system moves over an area that the temperature is above 80 degrees at the surface, but also that 80-degree water goes pretty far below the surface of the ocean. So it can tap into some of that energy and continue to be a strong tropical system with high tropical cyclone heat potential. And a lot of times that's pretty much off the charts here over the western part of the Caribbean, and part of that loop current there over the southeastern Gulf is starting to show up as well. And if you get tropical systems to move over those areas, if you've got the right atmospheric conditions, then rapid intensification can take place pretty quick. So water temperatures are high, they're above normal in many areas, and the tropical cyclone heat potential is quite high as well. So now let's look at some things that inhibit tropical development. And one is wind shear. When you got a tropical system trying to develop, it wants to have a vertical center, like a vertically stacked center. If it gets offset or blown off by wind shear, then it's really hard for a tropical system to develop. And that's kind of what we're looking at here. So when you've got low vertical wind shear, you get this nice vertically stacked column of air there. That's the center part of a tropical system. And it can intensify very quickly because it's not being bothered by any of the wind shear. On the bottom graphic, though, you see this wind shear coming in. And what happens is rather than getting a vertically stacked center, you get something that's a little more offset or tilted. And when you have this scenario, it's a lot harder for tropical systems to strengthen. And it's also a lot harder for tropical systems to form in the first place when you have a lot of vertical wind shear. So looking at the wind shear map that we've got right now, pretty much all the tropical development areas over the Gulf, the Western Atlantic, much of the Caribbean, and in the central and eastern part of the Atlantic are showing some fairly high wind shear, but there are a few areas here right there over the western part of the Gulf that's got some slightly lower wind shear. And if that's to shift eastward over the Atlantic Ocean, then that could help that non-tropical low or that old frontal boundary to get itself organized and perhaps become a tropical system in the next week or so. But there's also a lot of Saharan dust out there. I showed you that on the satellite. There's a ton of Saharan dust across the Caribbean, across the Atlantic Ocean, and we've even got some thrown here in the northern part of the Gulf Coast region and also right along the Atlantic coast. But an area that is not seeing a whole lot of Saharan dust is this area where we got all that moisture there. So again, that right now showing a little bit less influence on any developing tropical systems. So that's why I think the National Hurricane Center is pretty smart to be watching that particular area, even though it doesn't look very organized, even though the conditions in that particular area aren't perfect for tropical development, there's still a slight chance. And folks along the Gulf Coast, as well as the Atlantic coast, need to be aware a little bit earlier. So kind of smart that the National Hurricane Center is keeping an eye on that area right now. So let's go ahead and go through the global models. And the reason we go through the global models is they kind of give us a generic window into the future over the next week to 16 days. And the GFS model goes out 16 days. And you see there is a little bit of a concentration of some moisture as you get out to days 13, 14, 15, and 16 there along the Central American, or rather the next 10 days going out there in this particular area. So that's kind of one of the regions I want to be watching, because that's the most likely area that you would see tropical development during the month of June. And you see some pressures drops there off the Belize coast, but you really see most of the action trying to form here over the Pacific Ocean. And remember, Pacific hurricane season is ongoing as well. But you also might notice when this thing starts over is that you do also get a little bit of a low pressure area trying to develop in that particular region. So as we let this go ahead and reset, you can see there you get a little bit of organization, and you might even see a bit of a low there off the Carolina coast right there before moving off toward the northeast. So the GFS model is starting to pick up on something off the Atlantic coast. So let's go to the Euro model. And the Euro model will take this one also out 10 days. And notice you do see that moisture building there off the Atlantic coast, and maybe even a little bit of a low developing there before ejecting its way off toward the east. So the Euro model and the GFS are both buying into the possibility of some kind of a low pressure area developing off the Carolina coast. And that's, as a meteorologist, that's one of the things you start to look for. You want to look for agreement from model to model. So if the GFS and the Euro are showing possible development, you start to buy into the forecast just a little bit more. The Canadian model is also showing a concentration of moisture there off the East Coast. So the Canadian model might be buying into some kind of a low pressure area there coming up over the next week or so. But then notice as it goes out several more days, you're not seeing the moisture build up along the Central American coast the way we were seeing with the GFS. And also the Euro really wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to the Central American coast either. So I would be more concerned with something that's going to get a little bit closer to the American coast there off the Carolinas, rather than worrying about something that might develop there over Central America sometime in the next week to 10 days. The ICON model is also showing a bit of a concentration of moisture here and perhaps a bit of a low pressure area developing off the east coast there of the Atlantic Ocean. But we're not seeing a whole lot down here over Central America. So National Hurricane Center will continue to watch that particular area off the Atlantic coast, and then we'll continue to watch some of the global extended models to see if we see any more agreement there for Central America. So right now, I wouldn't be too concerned about anything over the Western Caribbean or the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, even though you are seeing some things on social media that are indicating hurricanes in the Gulf or tropical storms or something like that. It could happen, but right now the models are not suggesting that. So a lot of what you're seeing on social media is just generally clickbait. So let's go ahead and talk about what you can be doing right now. When there are no tropical systems that are affecting us, these are the items that you can gather right now because there's plenty of them on the shelves at the stores and nobody else is really going after any of these supplies because we're not talking about any tropical systems coming in our direction right now. So gather your batteries, your flashlights, water, and non-perishable foods. Make sure your first aid kit is stocked. You know where your medicine is. Maybe pick up a little bit of extra personal hygiene and cleaners that you can have on hand in case a tropical system decides to come in our direction. Have your IDs and insurance and important papers with you. You can also take pictures of each of those and save them as digital. Make sure you've got a basic tool set, entertainment for the kids if any tropical weather comes our way, and make sure you have everything ready to go for your pets too when any tropical weather comes in. This is a great thing to do right now when everything is calm, and then when everybody else starts to go crazy buying all of these things, you'll have them in place, so you'll be a step ahead of everyone else. So that's a look at what's going on in the tropics today. If you like this video, please click the like button, subscribe to my channel, and also turn on those notifications. That way you know when Let's Talk Tropics starts tomorrow or when Acadiana Weather Today airs early tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. Also, you can hear my forecasts on Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, and Freedom 95.1. And also follow my social media pages, both on Facebook and X. And thanks to everyone who subscribed to Acadiana Weather Today. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, do so right now. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday afternoon, and I'll see you Wednesday morning for Acadiana Weather Today.